everybody. Thank you for coming out today. My name is Margarita, and tonight we have Ed Sanders reading from Fug You, an informal history of the P-Side Bookstore, and Fuck You Press, the Fugs and the Counterculture and Lower East Side. Fug You is Ed Sanders' unapologetic and often hilarious account of 8 key years of total assault on the culture, to quote his novelist friend William S. Burroughs. Fug You traces the flowering years of New York's downtown bohemia in the 60s, starting with the marketing problems presented by publishing Fuck You, a magazine of the arts, as it faced the above-ground scrutiny and leading to Sanders' arrest after a raid on his P-Side bookstore. The memoir also traces the career of the Fugs, formed in 1964 by Sanders and his neighbor, the legendary Tuli Kupferberg, called The World's Oldest Living Hippie by Allen Ginsberg. As Sanders strives to find a home for this famous postmodern, innovative, anarcho-folk rock band in the world of record labels. Okay. Woo!
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be in this bookstore. I came down from Woodstock deliberately to do this reading and signing because this is one of my favorite stop-off points whenever I come into the city these years. I'm going to read about the raid on the P-Side bookstore, which took place January 2nd, 1966. But first I have to describe a few facts leading up to that raid. In February of 1962, a bunch of us, mainly pacifists from the Catholic Worker and the Committee for Nonviolent Action, went to see a movie by the Jonas Mekas called Guns of the Trees at the Charles Theater on Avenue B between 10th and 11th. And afterwards we went over, and I was very inspired by Allen Ginsberg's narrative. He was one of my heroes. And afterwards we went over to Stanley's Bar on 12th and Avenue B and had some beer, and I said I was going to put out a magazine called Fuck You, a magazine of the arts, and they said, sure, Ed. So I collected poems from my friends, and a few days later I went into the Catholic Worker, where I would often go for lunch and free soup and get clothes from their clothes bin. And I borrowed some stencils and typed the first issue on Dorothy Day's typewriter up on the second floor, and borrowed some Granitex paper and printed the first issue of Fuck You, a magazine of the arts. And it caught on. Dorothy Day soon declared me persona non grata at the Catholic Worker because it was the title, I think. Later, when I ran for office in Woodstock a few years ago, I had to have a press conference explaining Fuck You, a magazine of the arts, because the Republicans had heard about it and were spreading rumors. And I just told the press conference that I wanted a grabby title. Anyway, so I started sending it out to my heroes, Samuel Beckett, Fidel Castro, Nikita Khrushchev, and then all the beat poets. I sent it to Allen Ginsberg, who was in India. I sent it out to William Burroughs and Diane DePrima and people I really admired, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and Charles Olson up in Gloucester, and started getting a lot of manuscripts in, and it became a success, so to speak. I gave it all away. I wish I had a few copies now, more than I have, because in eBay money, it's worth quite a bit. So anyway, I met Tuli Kupferberg, who was standing outside the Charles Theater selling his little magazine that summer of '62. And a couple of years later, I decided to form a bookstore, the P-Side Bookstore. and Thule Kupferberg lived next door, and he pointed out that was a kosher meat market for rent on Avenue B between B and C. I just left the word strictly kosher on the front window in the Hebrew letters for kosher and put Peace-Eye Bookstore. And right then, Thule Kupferberg and I decided to form a band or a performance group, because all the poets would go to a place called the Dom on St. Mark's Place after the poetry readings, and they would dance to the Beatles, and I would see people like Robert Creeley and Leroy Jones, later Amiri Baraka, dancing to Stax Volt's, early Beatles songs. So Thule and I got the idea to form the Fugs. So we quickly, I thought we would call it the Freaks, and or the Yodeling Socialists was another name I thought would be good. But Thule came up with the word the Fugs after Mailer's euphemism in The Naked and the Dead, Fug, for fuck. So the Fugs formed with Thule, and I quickly wrote 20 or 30 songs each. And we noted that at our practices, a lot of people started showing up. And then we started playing at little galleries. And then we went to off-Broadway theaters. We played the Bridge Theater on St. Mark's near 3rd. We played in galleries and the Astor Place Playhouse, and for 2 or 3 years we honed our act playing in theaters. So meanwhile, Allen Ginsberg and I and others formed the Committee to Legalize Marijuana, which operated out of my bookstore, the Peace-Eye Bookstore, and it immediately attracted the attention of the fuzz. They started opening my mail, and they raided I had a place where I printed Fug You, a magazine of the arts, which I called the Secret Location, on Avenue A, a little back building that had DC power, so you couldn't run any AC equipment on it. It only was DC. It was in the back building on 203 Avenue A, and they raided that and took all my underground films I was filming. So the Fugs did a show at the Bridge Theater. The Bridge Theater was where, Jonas Mekas showed Flaming Creatures, and he was arrested. So it was a controversial theater. And so we started doing midnight shows, which were sold out. And then we did, on January 1st, we did a New Year's show at the Bridge Theater. And it was just after the first Fugs record came out from Folkways. We recorded for Folkways, and they gave us a contract, during the middle of the session. They called us the Fugs Jug Band, because that's how Harry Smith, the film, who was friends with Mo Ash, Harry told Mo that we were a jug band, and that's how we got the first contract. We axed off the name Jug Band and signed the contract with the Fugs. Anyway, so this is the raid on my bookstore. Fugs gave a midnight concert at the Bridge Theater, Saturday into Sunday, January 1-2, after which I went home to our apartment on East 27th Street and hit the hay. Then zont, 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 there was an insistent buzzing of the downstairs door around 4:30 in the morning. It was Thule Kupferberg. He said that there were policemen inside Peace-Eye. We took a cab back down to 383 East 10th. The lights were on inside the store, and a window was broken. There were police cars outside, and there was a couple of police officers in the store. A few were also in the middle room, where I kept the Fuck You press mimeograph machine and piles of uncollated publications, such as the Fugs Songbook, Bugger, Auden's Platonic Blow, and various issues of Fuck You, a magazine of the arts. The officers were examining some pages. I kept wondering what it all meant as I grabbed a hammer and some wood and started boarding up the broken window and fixing the front door. A cop was stationed outside on the street. As I was hammering, he said, "I don't care personally, but the sergeant is upset." In recent months, I begun to get the attention of law enforcement. For one thing, an undercover police informant had auditioned for the band. So I couldn't help but wonder, had the police deliberately smashed in? It was not long before I became aware of Sergeant Charles Fetta, who was then assigned to the 9th Precinct. Fetta did seem upset and appeared to have a case of phallophobia, commingled, I thought, with a splash of phallophilia, because he seemed miffed about instances of exposed male genitalia in some of my publications, maybe a bit too miffed. He asks, "Are all these publications yours?" I thought I should show some confusion and not really answer. My generation knew Lenny Bruce's dictum, "Deny, deny, deny," to the walls of our being. So I thought maybe if I appeared vague, I could avoid legal trouble. Next, the sergeant's hand seemed to tremble as he thrust an issue of Fug You, a magazine of the arts, close to my face. "What about that?" he asked as he pointed to the cover. He was clutching the cover to Volume 5, Number 4, which showed a boy I had copied from a Danish tobacco package at the cigar store where I worked on Times Square. Next to the lad was an Egyptian deity with a peace sign on his head and a spurting phallus. He demanded to know what the cover meant. Was the bird threatening the boy? What's that bird going to do with that boy? The sergeant was so upset over the cover that I was later surprised when it did not show up as one of the exhibits in my trial the coming year. I was placed under arrest, and the police carted away some valuable boxes of my publications, tens of thousands of dollars worth as measured in eBay wealth, say 40 years ahead. The 9th Precinct headquarters was at 321 East 5th. The 9th covers all the alphabet part of the Lower East Side. We arrived at the polished wood panel front doors, which to me had a kind of medieval feel to them. The officers within the precinct house seemed eager for my arrival. Indeed, there was a marked contrast of facial expressions between the grumpy, arresting officer and the policeman at the station house. There was certainly a lot of mirth in the 9th Precinct. "Hey, you're Peace Eye," one officer boomed. I nodded. "Hello, Peace Eye," another exclaimed. "Let me take a look," another commented, and laughing officers passed magazines hand to hand. In my press release, issued several days later, I described being driven to the precinct house. I was taken to the 9th Precinct, where they spent several hours rolling on the floor, screaming with glee as they contemplated the copies of Fug You, a magazine of the arts, the marijuana newsletters, and other goodies they had scarfed from my bookstore. But all they could come up to charge me with was a misdemeanor charge of possession of obscene literature with intent to sell. I was asked to sit at a desk where an officer asked me questions and typed on a non-electric typewriter, peck, peck, peck. Name, address, phone, age, height, weight. Then he asked me if I had any tattoos, to which I replied, no. Meanwhile, various officers kept on chuckling and chortling, reading through issues of Fug You. About a half hour later, my arresting officer, Sergeant Fetta, along with another officer, came into the room where I was being questioned. Fetta said, "Okay, Sanders, get into that room and take off your clothes." "What's up?" I replied. Then I noticed he was holding the very issue whose cover had so upset him back at Peace Eye. "I thought you said you didn't have any tattoos." He was pointing to the notes on contributors page, where I often placed humorous and speculative comments about the poets in the issue. In this particular issue, I stated that Ed Sanders had, quote, the Ankh symbol tattooed on his penis and the first 53 hieroglyphs of Akhenaten's hymn to the sun disk on his nuts. I was escorted to the bathroom, where I was asked to lower my trousers. Then the two of them bent down fairly closely. I thought a bit too closely, to scope my pants down groin area in a vain search for Akhenaten's hymn to the sun disk. I was grateful they did not lean down so closely that I could feel the huffs of their agitated nostrils upon my privies. As we passed through the bowels, I was taken down to the tombs, and then as we passed through the bowels of the tombs, wending toward the courtroom, we paused along a rail. And I said to Sergeant Feta, "You know, I'm going to win this. I'll fight all the way to the Supreme Court. And when I win, I'm going to throw a big party and invite you to come to it." And then I went before the judge. And what followed was a series of 10 or 11 hearings before a judge, and in this case a 3-panel judge. And I went to the New York Civil Liberties Union, and to my lasting gratitude, they took the case. So meanwhile, the Fugs were taking off. We had done our first album and then our second album, and we were selling out shows in the Greenwich Village at the Players Theater. And we toured in the fall of 66 and early 67, and I decided not to try to get public attention for my trial upcoming, but to focus on making sure the Fugs were a success. So there was my personal nightmare. And what we were looking for was a trio of judges. We didn't want the judges that had convicted Lenny Bruce. So we looked for a trio of judges that didn't contain any of the judges that had convicted Lenny Bruce for obscenity for his performance at the Cafe Au Go-Go in 1964. So meanwhile, I started to toy with the judge's mind. For one hearing, early in 67, I came all dressed in white coat, white shoes, white pants, white shirt, white scarf, everything white. And that went by okay. The next time I went all in red boots, red pants, red coat, red scarf, and he said, "Young man, this is not a ski lodge. When you come into my court, I want you to dress appropriately." And I said, "Yes, sir, yes, sir." So, then I had expert witnesses. Kenneth Koch and John Ashbery. And we got, in May of 67, we got a trio of judges that we thought we could go with. Judge Ernst Rosenberger. Ernst Rosenberger was my defense attorney. He later became a state Supreme Court judge. But Ernst Rosenberger said, "This is the trio. Nobody from Lenny Bruce is there. Let's go for it." So I called up my expert witnesses, Kenneth Koch and John Ashbery. Kenneth Koch was playing tennis at Columbia University, so he is the only expert witness in the history of world civilization that brought a tennis racket to court when he testified, was scheduled to testify. So the prosecution began its case, and I knew that I might have a chance when the prosecuting attorney pronounced lascivious as lascivious. And then the second reason I thought I might get off is I used to run these satirical ads in Fug You, a magazine of the arts. You know, I'd say, Fug You, a magazine. There was an ancient Egyptian goddess with a snake head so I had a snake-headed goddess, and I say, Fug You, a magazine of the art, promoting pornography through the Lady Dickhead advertising agency. So that was one of the prosecution's exhibits proving that I was attempting to sell smut. So I had a copy of Jack Smith's The Beautiful Book from Flaming Creatures, stills from Flaming Creatures, and they said that every picture in that was obscene, which was really so anyway, they kept screwing up, and they brought all they didn't confiscate enough of my magazine to show that I could have sold. I think you had to sell 6 or more copies. Anyway, their whole case was screwed up. So at the end of the prosecution, Ernst Rosenberger, my attorney, says, you know, we don't have to even present a case. So I said, all right. So he rested, and the 3-judge panel came back quickly and voted me a free man. I turned around to invite my arresting officer to the party I had a couple of weeks later at Peaside, but he had already vanished. We had pulled strings during that previous year and gotten him transferred out to Bayside because we had connections in the Mayor Lindsay administration. We got him transferred. Although this arresting officer would come to Fug shows. We did free concerts once a year at Tompkins Square Park. We had 8,000 or 10,000 people over there, and we would do our and he would call in a bomb scare, and he would come backstage and look in everybody's valise for bombs. Well, I think he was really looking for pot. Anyway, he was gone, and that's the story told in Fug You of my arrest and, you know, vindication. But it did take a year and a half to do it, and a lot of sleepless nights and worry and dread, but we prevailed. Anyway, thank you.
I think we have time for some like Q&A.
Any questions?
Yes, you in the back.
Could you tell us a little about the Peaside Bookstore? Like, did you sell used and new books? Did you have, what was the rent like?
Well, the rent on the old kosher meat market, it had blobs of chicken fat. They had a chicken, so I just painted over there was one blobby area that I just painted over. It was 3 rooms, $50 a month. It had, it was easy to take care of. And I just, the 8th Street Bookshop was moving, and they gave me a bunch of free bookshelves, which I stuck in there. So I still have them out of my writing studio. I have the old Peaside 8th Street Bookshop signs. I put out the word, and I got, you know, a lot of consignment. It was the era of what they called the mimeograph revolution. So there were oodles of mimeograph magazines, D.A. Levy in Cleveland, and John Sinclair in Detroit, and people, Semina in California, and various publications of Beatitude, and various publications in California and from New Orleans. So I got and then I, you know, had regular books too. You know, there was a thing called Bookazine on the west side, West 10th Street, where I'd go over and buy, you know, wholesale books, and ordered a lot from university presses. I don't know, I filled it up, and then I put out catalogs. When I was at NYU to finance my last year's school, I started putting out rare book catalogs. And Allen Ginsberg would collect pubic hair at parties, you know, that he would go to, Giuseppe Ungaretti and Barbara Guest and Mary Barack, and I got a lot of pubic hair, which I sold, and he signed his cold cream jar, and I sold that to Richard Avedon, I think. Anyway, so I sold a lot of things through for these mimeograph book catalogs, but mainly I gave away everything, all my publications. Just I gave them the Marijuana Review and Marijuana Newsletter and Fug You Magazine of the Arts and lots of street leaflets. And I had a mimeograph. It was like a print center. It was the first print. I allowed anybody to come in if they had a book they wanted to print. I let them use the press. And when I got a little money from the Fugs, I bought a electronic stencil maker. So I was printing street leaflets for the motherfuckers, and a lot of there was a lot of during the Summer of Love '67. There was a lot of police action against crash pads run by Groovy and Galahad on the east side. The police would crash and kick in these crash pads, so I printed a lot of leaflets to try to cool out the police. I don't know. Then I was involved in the Underground Railroad for soldiers fleeing to Canada. So these guys would come in and they'd leave off their uniforms, and I'd have to find a place to stash them. So I'd find a garbage can next block over and get rid of them. I should have kept them. I didn't realize that. Be like museum pieces now, but I wanted to get rid of them because I was afraid of getting popped. So and then I was running my band, the Fugs. It was Sleep Debt comes to mind. Yes.
Yes. When did you start creating your own musical instruments, and what was the process while it was created? Oscillation, modulation?
Well, after I broke up the Fugs, the first version of the Fugs in '69, and I remember Jimi Hendrix, when I was hanging out with him before he made it big, told me how much he hated his voice. And I said, man, you have a great voice. What are you talking about? But I felt the same way about my own voice at the end of the Fugs, so I decided I would never sing again. Until my guru, Allen Ginsberg, I chanted some Sappho to him out in Naropa in the summer of '77, and he liked it. So I did that in my performance, and so I started adding music to my act again, my readings. And I started inventing, I taught myself how to solder and about circuits, and invented two synthesizers that were mounted to gloves. It was called the Bardic Pulse Lyre, so I could do my Sappho. And then I invented a tie with pressure-sensitive switching membrane on a Sears and Roebuck tie. That was called the talking tie. Then I invented the singing quilting frame, which is a quilting frame with infrared beams that you intercept and close the note, and it feeds off to a synthesizer. So, and then I did other instruments too. But it was Allen Ginsberg's fault.
How long was that bookstore in business?
PSI opened in late '64. See, I applied to NYU grad school too late, so I needed something to do. I had a young daughter just born, and so I had all my my collection of books, and I just late '64, and then it closed when I got a contract to write a book on the Manson family. So I closed it down in early '70 to go out to Los Angeles to cover the Manson case. So 5 years, I don't know, 6 years, 5 years, a little over 5 years.
The graph was central to our generation.
Well, they tried to indict me in Kansas City, but the higher ups in the Justice Department turned it down. I don't know. I got married and I had a child, so I was more or less got free, but there was trouble. I've always been in trouble since I was in high school. So, yes.
Could you discuss your dealings with your record labels like ESP and Reprise? What were those like?
Well, ESP had a contract they offered their acts that was worse than Lead Bellies. I'm not going to go into it, but it was a very, very imprisoning contract. You can check with Patty Waters. You can check with other acts that unfortunately signed with ESP. I did keep Archie Shepp and Janis Joplin from signing. I remember hanging out with Janis Joplin, and she asked if she should sign with ESP, and I said, God, don't do that. And so she saved her career.
You couldn't have gotten to Albert Eiler, though, unfortunately.
No, I met him, did a concert with him at the Astor Place Playhouse. Yeah, he was a genius. Ornette, he got out of his country, But Reprise, Mo Austin was the president of Reprise, and the Fugs, it was either Elektra versus Reprise, and I decided to go with Reprise. Mo Austin had to play our demo tape for Frank Sinatra, who listened to it and said, I guess you know what you're doing. But I didn't know that till after the Fugs were done. I would have put that on our ads, approved by Frank Sinatra, Just like I didn't know that the FBI tried to get the Justice Department to indict the Fugs for our second album as being licentious and communistic. And the Justice Department, I learned when I got my Freedom of Information Act, actually said that we were protected by the Constitution, that we were anarchists and poets and rebels, and what we were doing was protect. It gave me a sense of patriotism when I learned. But if I'd had known it, approved by the Justice Department, because I'd get letters from broken-hearted teenagers, and my mom just broke my Fugs record, and smashed it. I could have said, mothers, before you tear up your kids' Fugs record, realize that it's been approved by the U.S. Justice Department. But hindsight is 100%. Yes, sir.
I was living in England, and I bought It Crawled Into My Hand, Honest. It crawled into my hand, Honest. And it was a very influential record in England. We hadn't heard anything like that. And I wondered if you guys ever did come and play there, maybe in '66.
Come to England? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we played the Roundhouse in fall of '68. We did a BBC.
I was living out in the sticks, so I missed that.
Huh?
I was outside in the provinces, so I missed that.
Yeah, we played the Roundhouse. It was a nice place. It's where the Doors played, and we did a BBC show or two. The tapes were destroyed of our. I wanted to get those tapes, but they're gone. But anyway, we played in fall of '68.
Now another question is that it's another peculiar interest of mine is buttons, otherwise known as badges.
Huh?
Buttons.
Who?
Buttons, like campaign buttons.
Buttons.
Were buttons important at all in the early 60s?
Well, buttons, there was a button store on St. Mark's. It started in 65 or 66, a button store run by Randy Wicker. And he became very successful. It was right between 2nd and 3rd Avenue. On the south side of the street was this button store. And then there was another button store on McDougal Street that became big. And so those were the two mothers of button mania, because then soon it started spreading all over. But at first there were just those two, one on St. Mark's and one on McDougal Street.
Fugs ever come up with buttons?
Oh yeah, we had the Fugs. I still have a few. Yeah, we had a red, white, and blue logo. We sold a lot of buttons. 25 cents, you know. So I have a bunch left. I don't know. Maybe eBay? No, I don't know. When I go into the Golden Bard retirement home and need money for painkiller, I'll eBay my Fugs buttons. Yes, sir.
I saw that on Firing Line with Buckley, and you were with Kerouac.
Yes.
What was going on there? I mean, were you good friends with Kerouac, or you seemed a little intoxicated at the time?
Well, Kerouac was an acquaintance. He would call me up every now and then and dictate poetry to me. I put one of the poems he dictated to me in Fug You. He was under the influence of his very right-wing mother, who'd had a stroke and was living with him and his wife. So I don't know, what can I say? It was the William Buckley show. It was early September 1968. I was on. Louis Yablonsky, the author of The Hippie Trip, a book, was on, and I was on, and Kerouac was on. Kerouac was a little drunk. He had been drinking with William Burroughs at the Delmonico Hotel and was really sauced. In fact, after the first section, he was so intoxicated he fell off the riser and splatted to the floor, and Buckley was thinking, all right, that's it. He was going to substitute Allen Ginsberg, who was in the audience, and we said, no, just, Jack will be able to do it. And, he was, like in 1960, Kerouac voted for Nixon, and Ginsberg voted for Kennedy. It was the beatnik split, the conservative liberal split. And Burroughs was the libertarian, or the anarchist, not an anarchist, but I would say more of a libertarian. So it was an interesting political split there. Now, Kerouac, he was kind of mean to me on the show, but we went out later to a bar and drank more, and he was quite friendly. He appeared in the same suit coat that he was buried in a little more than a year later. He was obviously drinking himself to death. He was very drunk. And, again, supporting Nixon. Is that it? Well, I don't know. I don't know that. But look, he's gone, and On the Road's now a movie. So I don't know. It's like when I was a young man, Samuel Beckett was very important to me. Waiting for Godot, and then Malone Dies, The Unnameable. I said, I don't really want to know about this guy. And then when he died, and I read Deirdre Bair's biography of him, I was glad I didn't read it when I was 20 years old and an impressionable youth from Missouri. It's the same way with Jack Kerouac. The more you dig into the life of poets, sadder it gets sometimes. All right, thank you all for coming.
Books are available for sale up front.
Oh, do I go up and sign?